with Norfolk game developers, one of our goals is to grow the local games industry and work out how Norfolk can be more attractive for games development. And that is why we've put together this panel today. So now I'll let our panelists introduce ourselves. We'll start with you, Jake. We move along to James at the end, the last. So if you'd just like to say who you are and a little bit what you do.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Well, thanks for having me. My name's Jake Montanarini. I'm the course leader for Games, Art and Design and Games Development at Norwich University of the Arts. So definitely coming from a kind of educational point of view into this discussion. I predominantly have a kind of an analog/serious games background, so I kind of work at the cross-section of using games design for scientific communication and kind of getting key stakeholders involved in some somewhat kind of dense topics through games. And I've just taken up the role of course leader at Norwich University of the Arts since September, so it's relatively new to me, but I've been at the university for about 5 years. Thanks.
Hi everyone, I'm Susie. I go by she or they pronouns. I've been in the games industry for 10 years, 8 years in a big organization down in Cambridge, and then the last 2 years I worked for a non-profit organization that helped people with career advice on how to get into the games industry, trying to demystify it and make it more accessible for marginalized people. And at the moment I'm just starting off as self-employed, so I deliver training around diversity and inclusion, learning, but also I still do a lot of talks about careers in games and how to get in there, especially for like younger people who are trying to figure out how can I make games. I'm very excited to be here today and talk about this. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Robin Milton. I'm a local game developer. I founded my studio in 2022, which is called Fairer Games. We're currently working on a game which is set in medieval Norwich, so we're keeping it hyperlocal, which is following the history of alewives, and it's called Brewess. You can wishlist it on Steam, which is my plug, but the release date is to be announced, so bear with me on that. And I also help run Norfolk Game Developers. I'm also a lecturer at Norwich University of the Arts on the Games Development Programme there. And I have a background in teaching, events management, community management, bit of everything. So that's me. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Tom. I grew up here in Norwich, but these days I live in Cambridge. Actually, my old computer science teacher is over there from A-levels. Yeah. I spent several years working at Inkle, which is one of the small but sort of modestly successful indie companies in Cambridge, where we did narrative games. And I left that a couple of years ago to work in a sort of regular old tech job, but I still make games on the side, and I run the Cambridge Games Developers Meetup in Cambridge, where we run game jams, socials, that kind of thing.
Good morning, everyone. I'm James Dunn, so I program manage Connected Innovation, which is basically all the innovation hubs and co-working spaces, universities and research institutes across Norfolk and Suffolk. And then in addition to that, we secured the funding for Creative East from government, which is a scale-up and investment readiness programme for gaming, film and TV.
Thank you very much, guys, for introducing yourselves. Now I'm going to get started with the questions that we have for the panel. I'm going to take the first question to you, James. And basically, it's how would you describe the games development industry?
It's a very tough one to start with, thank you. Well, I mean, in terms of the UK as a whole, to sort of start with, obviously, it's a very competitive sector. I mean, in terms of the value of it, it's around sort of 7 billion in terms of the last stats, which is enormous. The UK is an absolute leader in terms of producing games in Europe and also consuming games as well. In terms of the actual kind of makeup of the sector, obviously, as we know, both within this region, but sort of nationally, we've got big players, but also where a lot of the innovation happens and the kind of lifeblood of the industry is very much in the kind of indie space, which is really exciting. And that is kind of, I suppose, from our side, that's where we see a lot of those within the network as well that we work with.
And Susie, what kind of games are there in the games industry? What careers could there be for people?
Okay, so games, jobs and industry I could probably spend 20 minutes on, so I'll try to keep it short. At the last UK survey, I think they found over 150 different job titles, so I'm not going to go through all of them, but the overall categories you can think about is there's jobs in programming and development, There is jobs in game design and narrative, like we have over here. There's jobs in different types of art. You can become an artist for environment or characters, or quite specialized 3D or 2D artists. There is quality assurance and testing, very essential if you want to make a game. There is production that help people keep the games on track and run them. There is, I already said QA. Audio, very important audio. A game is not fun without sound, and that contains anything from creating the audio effects to voice acting, and also just being a composer for the amazing soundtracks we all love to hear. Then there's tons and tons of different jobs in service and operation side. Like any other business, if your game business is bigger, you'll have HR and lawyers and accountants. Lots and lots of people that you can think about in traditional big organizations are also there in games, and often quite fun because you're going to be in a fun environment. Localization, translation is something I've done for a few years as well, translating the games into your other markets. I feel like I'm definitely forgetting some here.
Well, anybody else can jump in if they can think of something else.
Yeah, if anyone can think of something else. But there's plenty of different jobs, and it's a really amazing market just because it's so creative, and there is something for every skill set, and often it's also quite transferable. So if you come from another sector, you could bring your skills into the games industry quite easily and get to work on really cool stuff.
And I think, if you don't mind jumping in, the other way around too. So we're always talking about the skills you develop when studying games, and just how kind of versatile those skills are in other industries as well. And I think there was a great, I'm not going to try and remember the statistic because I'll get it wrong, but Yuki had just put out a really good report about just how financially significant the game sector is in kind of working with other sectors. So like film was mentioned as well. So the skills you learn when making games take you beyond games too.
I'll just quickly add the roles that Susie very well listed. You've also got roles outside of development as well. So anything that would run a business in another industry, you can find that in games. So if you're someone that loves playing games, but maybe your skill sets are more aligned to legal services, there are those roles as well. So.
Yeah, and what Susie said about transferring skills from other industries into games. I mean, I came from University of East Anglia running DevOps, and the DevOps skills that I learned there have really helped me running live services in the games industry. So yeah, that's definitely something I found as well. And Tom, where does indie game development fit into all of this?
That's a big question.
Nice huge question.
Yeah, well, the indie scene has basically just always been there, especially in the UK. I mean, the UK game scene is founded on indies going back to, the 80s. Like Games Workshop, Ian Livingston, these people, they were just bedroom coders back in the day. And that's still the scene that's around now. I mean, I've got friends who worked on Minecraft back when that was small, like just on TigSource and stuff. And many of them also work in the other game studios, big ones like Frontier in Cambridge, or it's just a thing that they've just always done for fun on the side of their regular job. And I'd say the big thing is transitioning from doing it on your own as just a fun hobby to turning it into your career, which is not necessarily something that people want to do, because it definitely changes the dynamic and can just be a hobby. But there are obviously so many things out there supporting people who do want to make that leap and turn it into a career. Certainly if you're interested in getting into games, starting off as just a thing that I do for fun, and thinking of yourself as an indie and going to indie meetups is the best place to start.
Yeah, and with that, I know Newfangled Games, who are based here in Norwich, they actually started from a game jam, the current game. So that's a good example of that, starting with something which indies do quite often and then turn it into a very viable company. So now we move on to this region in particular, Norfolk. What's currently going on in Norfolk, Robin, in terms of games development?
Gosh. So I think a couple of things to highlight, and I know we've got some people in the room here, based out of Excella. We've got a couple of game studios. Rich, I know your studio based there alongside Newfangled, and Thieves Studio as well. But there's the kind of, I guess, landscape for game development in Norfolk is still mainly made up of small companies or what you might call micro studios, so below 10 people working on a game together. Some people might be balancing that alongside other work. And it means that the games that are being made here are really creative and innovative, but we don't have the kind of ecosystem like Cambridge, where there are much larger studios like Frontier, where you might find that people relocate for a large studio and then stick around maybe after they've left and form their own studios. So we're still quite grassroots, but I'd say it's a very healthy field of grass, if we're going to keep that. Yeah.
Does anybody else have any thoughts about the games development industry in Norfolk?
I will just add on the end, because I checked before coming here today. There is a tool called the UK Games Map, which is run by UKIE. They're the UK Interactive Entertainment Association, and they're a trade body for games. If you look on the map, I think there's 13 games companies which are technically listed in Norfolk, but because a lot of the teams are quite small, even my studio isn't on there at the moment because we have a virtual tenancy in London because it's much cheaper for us whilst we're on a shoestring budget. So don't necessarily be disheartened if you look at Norfolk on the UK map and don't see that many companies. It's also kind of the bane of my life is trying to document the people that are here and working out what they're working on and quantify it because, yeah, if you just look on where people are registered, it doesn't say the whole story.
I'll just come back on that. I mean, I think that's a really, really good point. I mean, one of the pieces of work we did for sort of the Creative East programme, obviously getting the evidence behind that to say the size of the kind of gaming sector. Obviously, Cambridge has kind of got the stats, but actually for Norfolk and Suffolk, this was really, really difficult. And actually, this is why, as part of our programme, at the moment, we're kind of putting a bit of money into actually really exploring in more detail the size of the sector in Norfolk and Suffolk, the opportunities for the sector in Norfolk and Suffolk, and then kind of what we need to be doing to really sort of support and kind of take the sector forward in the region.
I'll jump in with that, actually. One thing that I would say is I would rather be in Norwich starting up a games business than in Cambridge right now. Cambridge is very expensive, and there's a lot of very big players. You've got Microsoft that are funding Ninja Theory, you've got Jagex, who have just been bought out by a Chinese mining firm again, and you've got Frontier, who are all in somewhat dire straits right now, just because of the investment scene and all the rest of it. But the Norwich game dev scene is small to mid-sized companies all pulling each other up at the same time. I can't imagine a better place to get started and launch something, because you're not going to get drowned out by the big companies that are taking all of the talent and are drawing focus and attention away. There really are opportunities here right now, and there weren't 10 years ago when I was here. There was nothing.
Just to follow up on that then, Susie, if I was a games developer based in Norfolk and I wanted to get a career in games, what would be my options? And if they want to move out of Norfolk, which a lot of people actually have to do.
Well, the first good news is that since the pandemic, a lot more companies have moved fully remote, including, for example, Jagex. While they still have their seat there, I know that they have moved after a long time of deliberation to fully remote. There's lots of other studios that I know, and I also, over recent months, met more and more people that work remotely in games that move to Norwich because they like the scene here, but they don't like where their studios are. So that's good news for us and good news for you if you want to keep your circles and stay connected with the local scene. The other option is obviously trying to go it alone, starting your own business. I think we'll probably talk a bit about that more in detail later, but I think those are two options off the top of my head. So if it's not there, build it.
Yeah, go for it.
I just want to add that from our point of view, we've often historically had to prep our students to say, okay, when you graduate, where are you going to move to, right? Because of the idea that Norfolk has been kind of relatively small from a games industry point of view. But now our conversation is shifting, and I think we have a lot of students, so it's still definitely there, it's still an option, but also we're looking at kind of other options that are available, and now Norfolk is very much a player in that. So it's really good to see that conversation shift from our point of view, and I think it really sort of documents those those conversations are kind of evidence that the moves are happening. And we're seeing more students interested in starting up on their own and working remote. And then also alumni students as well that have kind of gone off and found success, to what you were saying. They love Norfolk because it's charming, and they come back and they're working remotely, and we're seeing more and more of that happening. So it's kind of growing from multiple directions from our point of view.
That's great, yeah. It's good to hear that so many students are just like finding jobs in Norfolk, or have plans here. And when people stay in Norwich and Norfolk, is Norfolk a good cultural fit for games? I'll just put this to Susie again.
Well, as someone who moved here after being in Cambridge we did the swapsies, I think we did the opposite thing. So I was in Cambridge for 10 years, and moving here, I actually found it incredibly pleasant to Norwich specifically, because there's a lot more culture, there's a lot more close-knit community and connectivity and mutual support, which I really enjoy, and I think that's like a big winning point for us.
Yeah, I mean, I'll jump in with a shout out for this event, which is part of that rich community of groups which are run by people that just really believe in their industry and connecting people and giving back to that community. Like Nordev wouldn't exist without a lot of people putting a lot of their own time in to make this happen. And I think, Norfolk game developers and the other communities like Hot Sauce, we try to work complementarily to one another and support one another where we can. So thank you, Tom. That was really kind of you to say, and it was really nice to hear that's coming across as well. And I think when people look at Norfolk from the outside, that's what they see first. It's like, oh, there's a whole bunch of people working together to make this work. So
and events like Sync the City as well. I mean, that's really good for. I mean, games have come out of there as well.
And with obviously Norwich Games Festival as well coming up. I mean, that not only is it sort of really encouraging for the sector, but also in terms of tourism and bringing people in from outside to really understand what we've got here. I think that's really, really exciting.
That's the big thing, right? If we can get people to Norfolk, then usually we can win them over. Yeah, exactly. Usually we can win them over once we get them here. It's just attracting them here with big, shiny events.
Yes, so that's kind of like usurped my next question, which was like what would attract people into Norfolk, but you've kind of just answered that. So let's move on to what would the economic benefits be to Norfolk of growing the games industry? And I shall go back to James on this, because that's kind of your area.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, just thinking alone, I mean, the more we can make the sector boom, obviously there's going to be a growth in jobs. I mean, I think we go back to kind of the talent pipeline coming out of Norwich University of the Arts, but also kind of our colleges as well. I mean, the skills boot camps that are being delivered as well out of places like Tech Educators. I think, so you've got a number of things. Obviously, you've got sort of indies that are innovative in the very kind of their whole kind of approach to life. So you've got kind of more innovative companies, higher quality jobs. And then obviously, like we talked about earlier as well, if you've kind of got people moving away from the sector but into other sectors, you've also got that kind of productivity boom of kind of the gamification of other sectors as well. So I think all round it is a no-brainer from an economic impact and sort of wealth creation for the region.
I think I'll just quickly, off the back of that, even games graduates have skill sets which are creative and technical, focused on problem solving, experience with working in teams, having to deal with your game breaking all the time. Not all professions will put you through that kind of a ringer. So what's quite good for the local economy as well is like anyone that's been through that experience is going to be valuable to sort of any business in any industry, because they've had all that experience for the better and the worse.
And just to kind of add to that, currently from our games graduates, like that conversation, as I was saying, we're shifting. If you imagine all of that kind of great pool of skills that we're kind of sending away at the moment, with the growth that's happening, we managed to keep that here, which kind of fosters just improvement in every area, really, because we're holding on to that skill set here. And those people may not stay in games forever, but they may stay here forever, and then they're going to keep those skills here. So, yeah, I think it's like only good from what I can see.
Yeah, and there's also quite a lot of games-related, games-adjacent companies that we call them. So virtual reality is a big thing, anything to do with art, and content generation. Has anybody got any great thoughts on that? Robin?
I mean, well, I was just going to say, yeah, the cross-pollination effect with like visual effects. We've obviously got Artlist, which is quite a large visual effects focused and software focused company in Norwich. But the skilled people that either come to work for them or go on to work other places afterwards, and and a lot of the tools are very similar now. Game engines are being used in a lot of different industries. Automotive is a really big one now, not just films and TV where you might assume it. Medical industry as well, people using games and engines for visualizations, often because the tools are now more accessible. A lot of them are free to use until you start earning money from them. So I think we're going to continue, as James said, to see a lot of growth. Gamification is an interesting word to me because as someone who's involved in game design, it gets used in a lot of different ways that don't quite make sense to me. But gamifying is what I'm going to say of other industries through these tool sets that we share. I think will strengthen it.
The other big one is virtual production. We mentioned several times about film. And how game skills are being used in the film sector. Virtual production is a huge area that's relatively new, and the rich tech culture that we have here in Norfolk means that there are some studios that are already operating in that, so they're kind of at the forefront of that, and it's nice to see that in Norfolk. And games has a direct relationship to that because they're using games engines to make their work.
And NUA's got some fantastic
Yes, and we have some great resources too, which we're really excited to kind of play with. So we're bringing that into the skills that we develop in our students as well. So it's all part of that big ecosystem.
There's a massive 360 screen and motion capture rigs, right? Yeah. So
volumetric capture.
Volumetric capture. Yeah, there we go. Good term. So there's a lot of resources coming into the region through things like research bids that the university has been putting forward, which can benefit everyone really.
And it's important to observe, and I think it's maybe obvious, but these are investments. So they are like investments not just in the tech itself, but in the development of the skills in this region. And as an institute, there's a lot of resource going into the development of creative computing and tech and games. So, and I think it should be kind of observed that that's a kind of investment in the potential of Norfolk and Norwich too.
Great. I'll move on to the next question then now, because we covered that quite well. And so the next question is, what are the barriers to growing the industry in Norfolk at the moment? And who wants to go in on this one?
That's a good one.
I'll go James again then.
It's a difficult one.
I feel like you sit in a lot of different rooms.
Yeah, it's true.
Certainly to me, if not others. So it's interesting to see.
I think the real barrier. There are a number of barriers. I think, if we're honest, I think it's that kind of access to finance that is really key at that sort of startup stage, particularly for this sector, and it's sort of the wraparound support that perhaps is whilst we've got great community sort of networks and everything else, and I think that kind of the wider wraparound support from kind of finance to kind of co-working spaces, like we're talking about in terms of some of the successes. You've got places like Excella with lots of kind of indies kind of really, really succeeding now, which is great. But how do we kind of help places like that on their journey and kind of take more, I suppose, bring more indies into kind of co-working spaces, incubators, accelerators, that sort of stuff? Where's the local funding to enable that? Often people ask me where it is, but with devolution on the way and everything else, it's kind of there's going to be more opportunities with more money coming to Norfolk and kind of each of the counties that have got their deals. So this is kind of an exciting time in some ways to sort of look at those barriers and say, actually, can we turn them into opportunities and investments in the years to come?
So you mentioned like co-working spaces as being one of the parts of what we need to have for that kind of thing, to have that like wraparound experience. What's your experience, Tom Veen, of like co-working? Have you done that at all?
Yeah, so this is one of the big problems with Cambridge. There's no clear co-working space. There used to be a coffee shop where we'd all meet up. That was as close as we ever got. But it's just the best thing, like working with other people who are, doing their own games, sure, but just being able to talk to them and share and motivate each other and share knowledge and skills is the biggest thing. I've worked in shared offices before, but never with other game studios. But I will say that there are a bunch of these in London, and they are fantastic. They pull each other up. There's Payload Studios, I think, who run Tentacle Zone, which is sort of an indie collective now. They all meet up in the same office, and I don't think any of the companies, there must be about 10 of them, in that space have gone under, because whenever one of them is having difficulties, they'll just exchange employees. Like if one of them does, stop trading, they'll just absorb it. So it's a really stable way to grow several companies at the same time. But you really need the infrastructure. Somebody has to run an office, and everybody has to pay at least a little bit for it. So they tend to be subsidized spaces, and that tends to require some outside support.
Yeah, Susie, you go next.
Yeah, I was also going to add to that. I think even if you don't have a co-working space that is there as a permanent installation where you go in every day and run your company from, because some people might prefer to work from home for accessibility reasons, or they work better in a quiet environment where there's no other people, but definitely having that sort of third space where you know that on a regular basis I can go here, I can exchange ideas and contacts with people that are like-minded and doing the same thing. I think that would definitely add a lot to that discussion and that possibility.
Yeah, I think that would accelerate things. I was just gonna be slightly annoying and be like, prototype funding. I think that's a big barrier, because there's a lot of graduates, there's a lot of people in the region which have got really exciting ideas, but aren't necessarily able to bring those to life due to funding. And even small amounts of prototype funding, even just hundreds of pounds that would go towards being able to publish things on a platform, can be the difference. And in terms of larger pots of funding, you see in other regions where you've had regionally focused or regionally locked funding specifically around games and creative tech businesses, people will move here for that. And then you see the knock-on effect.
Yeah, thinking about graduates, I'll bring Jake in here again. Do you think your graduates find they're kind of lost once they've graduated and they don't really have anywhere to go to work in terms of co-working space and funding for game projects done?
Yeah, I think it's certainly true for some. I think the good thing about the way this is all, I guess, in a post-COVID context as well. We put a lot of work into building community and belonging, and I think that helps students find a group, and then they and what we're seeing at the moment is kind of almost groups graduating off together. So they go to what you were saying about the co-working spaces. They have each other to kind of pull each other up. But certainly, from our point of view, there is an opportunity for more kind of co-working spaces, especially for the creative sector, where we can point people towards our graduates towards, and as a starting point, because at the moment our starting points are more information based and kind of other jobs, which again is back to that narrative of kind of maybe sending them away, which we want to kind of not turn away from, because we want to keep all of their options available, but also just increase the option to stay here. It's not necessarily kind of a blanket experience for everybody, but I think this idea of community is definitely coming out quite strongly in what people are saying, and I think we can echo that on the course in small ways. If we had more opportunities to do that, we would absolutely use those. So, yeah.
Yeah, and with you kindly hosting Norfolk game developers now, that will help in that as well, as we get more connection between industry veterans and the students themselves. Susie, do you think there's anything that's missing in the ecosystem in Norwich that we need, like incubator programs you mentioned?
Yeah, I think especially the incubator program. I had a very good experience when I finished university, that I was able to go to Finland on a EU-sponsored scholarship, where I worked on prototypes for 3 months. And the way it worked is that local companies who had maybe ideas of wanting to do something different with their products or making their stuff more engaging, they could just outsource that idea and space to students, and they then had 3 months to work on a prototype. And at the end, and I think that was mostly funded through local funds in the EU, but at the end, the students would then get lots of pitching support as well, so learning how to do a good pitch. They could then pitch it back to the companies, and if their companies like that concept, for example, we developed a game for a automobile museum that was there, so we made a prototype of road game, and they could then decide, we like the idea, we're going to buy it off you, or we're going to actually help you fund your studio, and that would have been more support to take that forward then. So there was also a really nice cross-pollination between the general industry within the region and games and tech products, and I thought that was such a great way of connecting this, and also, it enabled me to go to another country, which was amazing too. So yeah.
Thank you, that's brilliant. And James, do you think it's the responsibility of private individuals to provide these services, or do you think local government really has a lot more to do? A bit of a loaded question, because I think...
Yeah, I certainly think there's a role for both national and local government to kind of support. I mean, as Robin says, I mean, you look at kind of where it is working well in other regions, and it's got that blend of a real blend of kind of finance in the kind of community, but there is kind of specific support there from your county councils, your LEPs, and then DCMS funding on top of that. So I mean, from our region, obviously we've got the DCMS Create Growth programme, which is great, but then as Susie mentioned, it's like, whilst that is supporting, it's got kind of really tight eligibility around high growth potential. So it's all about scale up and investment readiness, but actually in terms of that early stage support, setting a company up and giving kind of funding to kickstart that journey, we haven't got anything like it. So that would be absolutely transformational if we could get that sort of stuff with, as I say, the kind of all sorts of opportunities. You've got devolution funding coming, you've got DCMS that are coming to the end of the sort of financial sort of commitments at the moment, and they're asking us and many others, what do you want? And this is exactly what we've been kind of batting back in that direction.
So an interesting thing there is that, like, a lot of games company startups will fail, and that probably doesn't look good at government stats, I guess. It's just really hard to get started in the games industry. Do you have any thoughts on that, Robin?
I was just going to say, as James was talking there, it made me realise something that we kind of experienced together was going to an event outside of the UK and seeing different regions kind of platformed at industry events. And I think that is something, I think anyone that's based in Norfolk, if they go to like an event in London, they'll be talking like, oh yeah, this is where I'm based. Not so more recently, but I have had people in the past be like, oh, don't you just make farming simulator in Norfolk? I'm like, well, actually, it's slightly less now, but I think things like the festival being here is helpful so people know what's going on, but also if there's any way to have opportunities for delegations of local companies to go to larger scale events, particularly ones which are abroad, which often is quite a financial investment required to be able to access those, that could also have a kind of great knock-on effect. But I do think that, back to the barrier question, that's one of them.
Yeah.
I'll just come back on that. So yeah, it was fantastic when we went there. We went to Slush in Helsinki, and one of the main reasons we were there is on behalf of the Norfolk and Suffolk Unlimited, the inward investment team for the region, was basically mapping out exactly that. Could we take a delegation there, and what sort of sub-sectors would we want to be looking at, of which from our side gaming would 100% be one of those. We've got a track record of doing this. We're taking a delegation to the Mobile World Congress in a couple of weeks, and we're basically sort of supporting with that, doing all the wraparound support as well, which I think is really key with these sorts of things. It's not just taking the companies there and then giving them absolute baptism of fire in terms of all the kind of potential investors and everything else they're engaging with. It's sort of support with the pitching, support with kind of what to expect, and then kind of allowing them to flourish.
I was really proud when we were at Slush that I felt like there was a greater Norfolk contingent in Helsinki than there was other, even like UK-based kind of delegations. So it was just, yeah, it was a really cool moment to have you and Scott there, and I think sometimes that's quite rare to be able to get governmental vote of confidence in that way.
I'm not sure who I'd point this one to, but what community events are there going on at the moment that people could get involved in to get kind of like a foothold in the games industry. Anybody got any thoughts on that?
Locally or UK-wide?
Locally, yeah. Although we can go talk about things that local people can access that are like Global Game Jam. Anybody can do that. Yeah.
Well, I think it was mentioned earlier, Norwich Games Festival. I think that's a big one that's happening. What you guys are doing, Norfolk Game Developers, that kind of regular, consistent kind of meetup to help build a kind of resilience in the community, I think is also really good. You're seeing a little bit more of a presence of games at the Science Festival as well, which is great. And then you can also see how tech, the wider kind of understanding of tech is involved in that as well. And those are the main ones that spring to mind. But then more kind of widely, I think you've got Develop Brighton. If you're thinking about more of a national kind of community, Develop Brighton is a really great conference to kind of go and see what's happening at the UK kind of national level. And then from our point of view, Games Jams, I think is a really inspiring point actually, are a great way of being active, being an active participant in the community quite easily and quite risk-free as well. And I think game jams are the right way to go to kind of help build that.
Game Anglia run, I've just forgotten the name of the festival. Is it just the Game Anglia Conference? Games East.
Game Anglia Fest.
Game Anglia Fest, yeah. Sorry, my brain just got really muddled then. So Game Anglia also run a kind of regional focused conference, which just happened a couple of weeks ago. That's based out of Ipswich, so it's still really accessible if you're based in Norfolk, and has internationally renowned speakers at the events. They have exhibition space available for developers to come and bring their games, physical games, digital games. You get a chance to play games that haven't come out yet and give feedback, chat to the people that actually made them, because often at the bigger events in London, it will be a PR firm that's been outsourced to run the stands. So particularly if you're interested in working in games, it gives you that great opportunity to chat to the people that have made the thing that's in front of you.
And also with that Develop conference, obviously, you mentioned it, both you and me went to Develop in our early stages to sort of just get a feel and talk to people and work out what we were doing, didn't we? So, yeah.
If you want to, I can add some just more global online initiatives. So another thing is for individuals specifically, if you are trying to get into a specific career path and you're from a marginalized background, it might be worth checking out Limit Break. They are a fantastic mentoring program where you can find a mentor that already works in the games industry and just work with them for half a year to help them develop their skills. I think they usually open around April, I want to say. So that's something to keep an eye out on. There's Into Games, which is just more career advice website that I worked before, or like a non-profit. They sometimes also host things like a Rising Star competition. There's Grads in Games who have lots of information, and I think also some competitions where people can just showcase some of their work through various things they host. And there's obviously smaller specific communities like POC in Games and
Women in Games.
Women in Games, yes. I should know those.
Well, I just say that because they are very good for the online thing, for accessibility, and they're putting on one soon. I think it's 7th of March, something like that. So.
And meetup.com is a really good place to find other more regular events that might be regional. Norfolk Game Developers is based on there. I'm pretty sure Suffolk Game Developers is on there. Cambridge Indie's on there as well.
We're on Eventbrite. Meetup charge us.
Yeah,
I don't have any money.
Too expensive.
That's the problem. Once you build a community on one thing, you kind of get locked into it. But yeah, cool. So and Eventbrite as well. And at most of those sites you can search based on your location. So just put in the word game and then your location. And that's how I found Norfolk Game Developers when I was at uni, because I was just randomly searching for things. So.
Moving on to a different angle, and I'm going to go back to James on this one. Is there any way we can encourage existing games companies to move into Norfolk in some way, like say a satellite office? What is the scope there?
Yeah, I think this goes back into the right incentives. I think a key thing that we are doing right is putting on all these events and showcasing what is here. because that is only going to serve to attract, as we're already hearing, kind of Cambridge indies are genuinely, and we're having this conversation through Creative East, they are genuinely excited about what is happening on this side of the border. So whilst obviously often the kind of conversation around inward investment is thinking all around the world and kind of attracting companies or from elsewhere in the kind of country, actually we also have opportunities sort of pretty close by to attract with some of the right incentives. And obviously on top of those kind of incentives for those companies, it goes back into that kind of what do we need to do to our kind of local area to sort of make it more attractive as well. So going back to those, what is the landing package? Where are they going to go? Who are they going to connect in with? And I think that goes back into the incredible assets we've got with the universities. So it is that kind of partnership with academia as well that will attract. I mean, we have just the fact that we've got the kind of Tiger accreditation at kind of Norwich University of the Arts for 2 of those courses. We've got University of Suffolk as well. I know that's at the other side of the border, but that is really compelling to so many that we go around. And I think from our inward investment team, the more we kind of have talked about the sector and kind of showcased what's going on and kind of what's coming up, they're now really keen to start taking gaming, kind of immersive tech as a package to all the different events that they're going to in the years to come, which is really, really exciting and plays directly into this.
I'm just going to toot Norwich University of the Arts horn because you are a multi-Tiger award-winning course, as well as being accredited, which is and internationally ranked for games art. And, you know, I think considering some people don't think Norfolk's like techie, I think you pack quite a punch.
Yes.
It.
Our graduates are genuinely world class, and that feels me required to say that because they work very, very hard to do that. But the staff as well are the ones that get them there, and we're kind of getting recognised by that with Tiger, as you guys brought up, and winning awards to kind of really give that seal of approval of what we're doing, rather than just kind of like blowing it out of our arse and just saying, oh yeah, we're great. Like we actually have the awards for that, so we can talk with pride rather than kind of ego, I think, about that. And I think it would be great if some of these other bigger companies could really look a little closer and see that, because they've got a ready pool of makers at their fingertips if they were here. So
I'll just quickly spotlight Norwich Bid did a really good campaign called Work in Norwich Win. Which has got some really cool videos on it as well, which shows like why it's nice to work here. And I think, you know, there's definitely hopefully a snowball effect of all these different elements which are picking up, and gradually I think outside of our kind of bubble people are starting to recognise what's happening, which is always good.
And so, Susie, if one of Jake's graduates wanted to get a job in an established games company but wanted to remote work from Norwich permanently, would that be a viable option?
It depends on the company options. Some of them have been opening up to full remote, and I think it would work quite well because you can keep your local support. Did I understand the question right? Whether there was someone who,
could they just live in Norwich and work for a games company based in Leamington Spa, for example? Yeah,
definitely. I mean, I recently recruited a friend to move here who works for a big games company because he was here visiting for a few days, was just blown away by all the board game cafes that are there and the game show and tell and all these things. And I was like, that sounds a lot nicer than where I am, and lives here now. So I'm going to be a very slow market
one at a time. Convince them to move.
But I definitely I've spoken to people also over the last few months that are just moving here now because they just like the region, they just like the people, and that the feeling, like the nice mix of the medieval as well with the creative. So there's points for it, and it's possible. You just have to find and identify the companies, because some of them are now slowly backtracking to a hybrid model, which I'm not a big fan of, because I think remote makes things a lot more accessible, not just for people who want to stay in the region, but also just on several levels of accessibility.
I'm going to go a little bit political here now. So with the recent limitations on immigration, putting up the minimum salary, could that have like an adverse effect on people coming to Norwich to work in the games industry?
I think for the games industry in general, that would be quite a crackdown, because when you look at the UK, I looked at the UK reports, and I think 19% of staff that work in games come from the European background, and I think another 8% of that from like the wider world. So there's a lot of talent coming in from external things. And as someone who's worked in international teams all of her life, because I went to Finland to work with very international teams, and in my last organization, when I worked in localization, I obviously worked with people from all across the globe that you needed to come from other countries. I could only do my job because I was a German native speaker. So it's definitely very important, and it is very difficult. I think we were taking away a lot of perspectives by pulling up walls and making it harder to move here and exchange, because it's not like people are taking jobs from you. They are helping you create better and varied products that then appeal to a bigger market, which then brings in more money in the long run. So I think it's definitely good to stay open-minded and important.
Yeah, I agree. Does anybody else want to jump in on that at all?
Yeah, I'll say I think it's maybe this is a little utopian, but like games is a global industry at its core. Like you put a game out in the world, it being a digital product, it's very accessible to people around the world. So I think we're always going to go through periods of change that are kind of always going to be impacted by kind of politics, for better or for worse. And I think games being a global industry from the get-go is always going to be a benefit to us, kind of keeping doors open in various different ways. Yes, it might be hard at some times and a little easier at others, but I think that nature of the industry really helps. And then I think you can kind of see that in various different ways, particularly in indie as well. So I know like Newfangled, they kind of have workers all over the globe, and that's a really viable option for kind of indie development as well. So yes, I think at times it can be a bit tough and a bit bleak, but I think the nature of the games industry really helps in this case.
Yeah, well, I mean, ultimately you're creating a global digital product. Yeah. It's not something that is limited to, how far you can ship it. It's digital by its very nature. So, yeah, that should be factored into the people that are working on it and its potential.
Yeah.
I think some of the challenge as well is the UK is really well regarded for games, for creative industries around Europe, around the world, and people want to come here and work and kind of add to that kind of diversity and creativity we've got to then really enrich the sectors, and obviously kind of limiting that is only going to be a negative thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
And you want a diversity of lived experiences in your team, right? You can't just have people that have all lived exactly the same lives working on something.
And it makes the games better if it's from a more diverse, like the people understand global markets. You need to understand global markets to hit global markets, and that only happens by having a global outlook.
Yeah, like if you want your game to be successful in Germany, not having any connection with any German people is going to be a challenge, right?
So, and now another very open question I'm going to pick on here. I'll go with Robin. What are the challenges to the games development industry at the moment?
From my perspective as a tiny studio, I think a big challenge that we have at the moment is attitudes toward investment and financing. Everyone is very risk averse. We saw a huge boom in investment across the pandemic because lots more people were playing games, and that's great. But in some ways, the level of investment and the risk that was taking was kind of unnatural and unplanned for. And so now you're seeing the knock-on effect of that, where a lot of companies and a lot of publishers are having to roll back. And as an indie, we're seeing publishers want much more in terms of a prototype before they're willing to progress any kind of conversations. So I'm obviously in an indie team. We're working on a prototype for our game at the moment. We've been pitching to people. We've had a lot of positive feedback, but people want a lot more made before they're willing to kind of get involved. And that has a financial cost to it, because for myself, running a studio, I don't want to be asking people to work for free just so I can get the game made. So it requires me to go out and find funding to then find more funding. And I think you see there has been a slowdown in that kind of very kind of early stages of funding, and that's been kind of a challenge. I don't think there's no opportunities, and I think, with any kind of economic change, there will always be opportunities that come out of the woodwork with it. But yeah, I think games maybe 3-4 years ago would have been funded a lot earlier in development, with maybe a lot less content there than they are now. So if you're looking to go down that route, I would say just bear in mind that you might have to have a much more developed prototype or vertical slice or MVP than you might have done in previous years. But that's not necessarily a reflection of you or your game idea or your studio. It's just the nature of the market at the moment.
Everybody thoughts on that, Tom? What challenges there are for games development at the moment?
Yeah.
Global economic challenge.
Yeah, so the last year has been a very interesting one for the game industry because a lot of the big companies haven't had big hits and are struggling to pay employees. There have been a lot of layoffs, and that's going to continue this year. And I think ultimately the heart of the problem is that games is incredibly unpredictable. It's not, the hit rate is something like 1 in 10 for games that you have heard of, and most games you have never heard of. That's incredibly difficult for a company that has to pay 500 employees, because who knows how long it will be until they get that big hit that will keep them going for another 10 years. And that's what we're seeing in Cambridge, certainly. There's a lot of companies, Jagex, their game, their only real hit is RuneScape, which was old when I was young. And they're still going on that, but they haven't had anything since. And so that's really what it takes. Fortunately, games are a novelty industry in some ways. Players, part of the reason that it's so hard to predict what is going to sell is because one of the ways to get noticed is to produce something that's genuinely new, that players genuinely love, and that comes out of nowhere, which means bedroom coders really can make something that just blows up. Look at Vampire Survivors or Palworld, or small teams, less than 20 people in both cases, some of the biggest games around. And that is incredibly hard to manufacture. There is a lot of luck involved, and I'm sure that makes it very difficult for investors and for publishers, because they know that they need to turn around 20 games before they can be guaranteed to get their money back.
Susie, are jobs in the games industry of high quality in terms of salary and working conditions?
I will start with this depends. It depends largely which employer you work for. I think there is a great variety of quality, and it's definitely always good when you go out looking for a games job yourself to use platforms like Glassdoor and LinkedIn and other smaller communities where people feel they can be more candid, to get a good sense check what their culture is like, especially when we talk about the work quality, because while I think over the last 2 years that I've been in the industry, I've been very happy to note that there's a trend away from crunch culture. You will still come across some individuals who believe you have to sacrifice your whole life to make a game and that only creativity comes from suffering, which I wholeheartedly disagree with. So it's definitely important to look, and I think it's really nice to see, Robin, you spoke about your company last year and the efforts you made to make it accessible. So I think in terms of work quality and job quality, a big variety, and be aware and try to do better if you are in a position to do so yourself, be mindful about it. And when it comes to jobs, I think there's a lot of good jobs. The pay has also, I think, increased over the last few years because companies notice they will lose their top talent in tech to bigger tech companies which pay more, which has driven the prices up. But again, here it depends vastly, which, if I'm very honest about what area you work in, because some will always pay more than others, which is depressing, because I think, I've met people in all different backgrounds that work incredibly hard, and sometimes it makes me really unhappy to see these disparaging the differences in salary. But
when you say area, you mean geographical area, or you mean area of work?
Area of work, like whether, if you compare a QA salary to a developer salary, there is often a vast divide, and that's a problem. When it comes in general to working and salary compared to other industries, I think we're somewhere on the top middle. That's just my gut. I don't know. I didn't actually look up any statistics. So, but I think it can pay, especially if you have a successful studio. If you have a good studio, you can make a comfortable living with it. And
Anybody else want to talk on that at all? Quality of the games?
I mean, I would just say in games, there tends to be a lot of movement in staff, so people do quite regularly move between companies. I imagine they would do as well in other tech businesses. But what that can allow for is quite fast career progression. So if you feel like you're able to kind of demonstrate your abilities, opportunities to both move company and access a promotion are quite common. Obviously, at the moment, the job market is very different, but kind of traditionally, because there's that movement there, I know people that have been able to move up much quicker than you might be able to in an industry where you have to wait for someone to retire or someone to move from that role for you to be able to progress.
Can I also just say that there are some not ignoring kind of the difficult things that are happening, but just to kind of add to the conversation, like the games industry, because it's made up of people that are mostly passionate about games, there's a lot of like positive activism within it. So like unionization kind of is happening, and the conversation is a bit more open, which in terms of other industries that isn't always accessible, and that's really great. But then also you see companies that are, because they have a bit more agency, that are trialing things like 4-day working weeks, hybrid working, and we're seeing a lot of almost like play with what working culture could be like. And that, I think, should be celebrated about the games industry and its kind of openness to try those things. Again, that's not to kind of ignore some of the challenges that are there, but it's just to kind of add to the complexity of the conversation. There is some really interesting kind of explorative things that are happening to shift what working could look like globally, I think. But yeah, particularly in the UK as well.
Can I just quickly add to that? Another thing, just because you mentioned the accessibility, that really resonated with me, because it was also interesting when you look at in the games industry, it has a higher representation of people with neurodivergent, like ADHD and autism, is overrepresented in games compared to the rest of the population in other jobs, and the same with LGBTQ plus people, which is great. That also means that it is an industry from a quality of life perspective where you can very much be yourself, and I think that was the most exciting things for me, to work in games, that I could show up with my tattoos and my piercings and my colorful hair, and no one would say, oh, you can't get a job. They were like, well, what can you bring to the team? And in that regard, I think the games industry has like a big advantage over many other industries that are still very conservative or restrictive when it comes to personal expression. So go games on that front, at least.
Robin, you were saying that there's a lot of movement in the games industry. Is that just because it's really unstable? Because it does seem like there's lots of layoffs.
Question. I mean, I'd say in the last year, the games industry has seen a huge amount of redundancies globally. You tend to hear of it more in America just because a lot of the large companies have big head offices there, but it's definitely affected the UK as well. I think, as Tom said, like, games is unpredictable. It's an industry that is entertainment focused, and all entertainment industries have elements that are unpredictable. I think things like cost of living and interest rates going up have had a huge effect on companies, particularly where there's been recent acquisitions. So if you've had a massive company buy a medium to massive sized company in the last 3 to 5 years, we're now seeing a real tightening of purses as a result of the interest rates going up, because any debt that's taken on with that is now far more expensive than it might have been at the time, and sadly that seems to have resulted in staff being laid off.
The moving, though, between jobs is not necessarily a new thing. This isn't a result of kind of what's happening at the moment. And I would kind of offer the suggestion to put it down to the idea that, go back to that idea of like lots of people that work in the games industry are gamers and games players. So you can almost have the opportunity to follow your passion, right? Follow where you might want to work on. So I think moving from job to job is just a kind of has been historically a quality of the industry, but maybe that's kind of, and this is just a suggestion, maybe that's kind of been enabled because of this idea of like allowing to be pursuing passion, like you might be kind of come up working on racing games, but really you're like RPGs. And I think once you develop those skills, there's opportunities to move. And I think we've seen that for quite some time in the games industry. So I just wanted to kind of say, I think the kind of recent behaviour with what's going on in the industry and all the layoffs isn't wholly linked to kind of people moving a lot. I think it's always been there.
Yeah, and there's been lots of large companies that have closed, and then medium-sized companies have been built out of them. And yeah, that's a really good point. Like QA roles are quite traditionally a fantastic open kind of like first step into the industry, and then people might work into game design roles or any other roles from there. So yeah.
Yeah, your point, Jake, about people following their dreams and becoming a game developer because they love playing games. That leads me into my next question, which is making games a fulfilling career choice?
I think it depends on who you ask, really. I kind of sidestepped my career and ended up here because I absolutely love games, and there was a moment where I was working a rubbish job in sales, which is soulless, or I found soulless. Sorry to offend anyone in sales. And I would come home and I would turn my PlayStation on and play, and then I would have this immense sense of guilt for playing it because I feel like I should be going and doing something different, changing my life because I hated my job. And then I just said, screw it, I'm just going to work in games. And then I just let that river take me. But that was the most powerful kind of point in kind of recent past where I just made that decision. And like, it's not always easy, but kind of, I guess, working kind of games adjacent really in education. But it has the potential to really really inspire and I think really change. I'm going to sound super corny, but change people's lives. And I think at education, we have the chance to do that. It's not always easy, but we have the chance to do that. And that's really fulfilling for me. So I think I dodged that question by talking about my personal anecdote, which hopefully answered the question in some way.
Susie, do you want to jump in on that as well?
So first of all, I think, yes, I think I came for the games and I stayed for the community because to a large chunk, it's some of the best people I've worked with, it's some of the most creative people I've worked with, and that is very fulfilling to have as your peers and your colleagues and your managers. Is really amazing what community you can find in there and how nice people are. Even if you go to a meetup and you meet someone from a different games company, you instantly have something to talk about and connect. And it's also been really great to see how tight-knit people are and support each other. So on that front, I think I found it very fulfilling. When it comes to games, I would cautionary say that maybe don't work on your favorite game.
It's like they kind of don't meet your heroes.
It has its advantages, it has its downsides. For example, like I used to work on RuneScape because it came up earlier, and I don't play it anymore. I didn't play it much before, so I have not lost too much. But because once you are, for example, working QA and you have all the cheat codes and you can hop around everywhere, it's incredibly slow to walk anywhere on foot. So maybe just beware. I would never work for Bethesda because they make my favorite games, and I don't want to ruin that for myself. So. But if you can make your own game, go ahead and make it because that's important.
I mean, yeah, I would say yes, it's definitely fulfilling. I've always been the person that's a bit artsy and a bit sciencey, and games has always just allowed me to be both those things all the time, which I love. And for a long time when I was younger, I jumped between loads of different career ideas, but games was the one that really stuck. It's constantly changing and evolving. There's constantly new things happening, so it never gets boring. I think the downside of games is that because a lot of people are really passionate about video games that they love and they work at those companies, that can sometimes result in those people being taken advantage of by the companies because they use all that passion but don't necessarily look after the people. And it can also be something that I spend a lot of time trying to break down is like there are people that try to gatekeep games. So it's like, oh, well, if you've never worked on a game before, you can't work in a games company. And those companies tend to lose out on a lot of very talented, intelligent, interesting people just because they haven't had the word game on their CV. And that can be infuriating for people that have all the right skills but aren't being considered for roles, and it can be really hard to get into. So there's a lot of challenges there, but I think if you can carve your own career path and chase the things that you really enjoy and get a lot of enjoyment from in terms of like challenging you and your brain, it can be incredibly rewarding.
Is that your experience too, Tom?
Yeah, I think so. I think everybody.
I'm used to that.
No, I mean, I think I basically completely agree with everything that's been said, and it seems to be the general sentiment. One thing I will say that I personally love about the game industry is just how diverse it is in terms of the things that you are making. So presumably if you are interested in making games, at least in a development role, whether that's art or writing or whatever it is, you like making things. And if you, let's say, like writing things, you're going to be a writer, and most of that is working alone, whether you're in journalism or writing novels or whatever. If you want to make films, films are always made with large teams in a very specific way, partly because they're older industries and partly because there is a set way of doing that. But games is incredibly diverse in the sort of things that get made. You can be an indie and make things on your own in your bedroom and be successful doing that. You can join a 2,000-person team doing that. You can join a contracting studio and work on all sorts of interesting things with incredibly highly skilled people. You can join a small indie team. There's so many different roles for so many different people. So even if maybe you stumble into a job working somewhere and you find it's not for you, there's probably so many other jobs in the gaming industry doing the same sort of thing that you would just love. I personally fell into a studio that was doing really artsy indie stuff, which is what I wanted to do. I wanted to be on the cutting edge where most of what we did was a failure, and that was there for me because people are still really working out what games are. Like, games come out 3 years ago that create a whole new genre that is still huge today, and that will continue for probably forever because games are just so novel by their nature. I love that part of it.
That's a great answer.
And James, are you finding it rewarding promoting the games industry?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think, notwithstanding the kind of the challenges behind it, but going back to Robin's point, the passion, working with people in this sector, the passion they have for kind of, I suppose, being able to express their creativity, I think is the kind of the key point. And working on that day in, day out. Yes, okay, there are challenges within it, but actually, when people are talking about the game they're working on or the kind of the background that they've had within this sector, it's fascinating. It is such an interesting kind of sector to work with, and that's one of the many reasons why we're so excited to be working with it, to kind of map it out and try and help take it forward.
Right, and that's the end of our prepared questions. Now, can we have some questions from the audience, please? Does anybody?
Hi. Hello.
Hello.
I'm in college at the minute, and I know you talked about like top talents leaving for bigger companies, and I know a lot of my classmates and people are doing that at the minute. Will Norfolk ever be like attracting top talents? Like, where do you see the industry being in the future? Will it be like a place for top talents, or?
I think that depends. I'm sure somebody on the panel has got a good opinion about that.
I mean, I would say yes, but I'm biased. I think it's a really good question. I think if you look at how much the industry's grown in the last 5 years, if we have that again in the next 5 years, which I think is very achievable, I would say yes. Obviously, I do not have a crystal ball, so asterisk next to that. But yeah, I think entry-level roles is the biggest challenge. And that's something that, I'm sure James has come up in your research. And when I'm talking to people, and they're like, what does Norfolk need? And it's like, it's the entry-level role. So as you're graduating, you have a route that is still local. And I think that's the big one. Yes, we've got more companies here, but until the companies grow to a point where they can take on new people or more junior roles, that's a big challenge. So.
Thanks for your question, by the way. That was great. Yes, it will. 100%. Definitely will.
Jake has no asterisk. It's just
No asterisk. Yes. I've got loads of crystal balls, and they all say yes.
Hello there. Yes, so my question, it sort of stems from the entry into the games industry. Because when I was looking to get into the games industry, it was very much either you just have to be insanely talented and learn it all yourself, or go to university, study for 3 years and hope you find something at the end. Do you think sort of more programs like apprenticeships and internships within the games industry would help people who learn in different styles have an easier time getting into the industry? Because I've found in software myself, having access to an apprenticeship has very much suited my learning style, and the things I've been doing feel like they matter. Not to discredit learning yourself or university, but it just didn't sort of suit me and my learning style. I'd love to hear thoughts on this.
So one thing that comes to mind immediately is that tech educators who are based in Norwich, James Adams, he's there, they're doing a Unity course, which has kind of got a very low barrier to entry, hasn't it? So that's something that would actually probably be a good route for that. And now I'll pass it on to the panel for their answers.
I'm happy to go on the apprenticeships, because for a short time that was quite literally my job, was to figure out what apprenticeship standards currently exist that could be mapped onto the games industry, and it is very few. So what needs to happen on this front, first of all, is whenever you want an apprenticeship, you need someone to design a standard and sit down. For that, you need like a panel of specialists from that industry that have the patience to sit down with the government and figure out how do we standardize this. And then we need a training provider. So there's a long, slow movement, and TV and films actually over the last few years have invested a lot in this. The games industry, I'm sorry to say, is lacking far behind. I've spoken to a lot of amazing people who are really passionate about this, myself included, because I think I did university and I regretted it when I thought about apprenticeships that would have worked much better for my brain as well. So I fully agree there. There is a level 7 apprenticeship in game programming that has been developed or spearheaded by someone in Sumo Group, and that is now being rolled out wide over the country. The question is just which studios will actually make the time to do that. And apprenticeships are quite good for many ways, because most big studios pay taxes that they can get back through financing the training, so it doesn't even actually cost them that much. But it is a question of uptake. So there's this one, there's one in community management and customer support that could be mapped on the games industry that some studios have started, but that's the two big ones, and that's sad that I have such a small number for you. So it is in the making. I know there's panels of peeping and groups of people working on this and looking at the different aspects, but we're definitely lagging behind there. So that's the current state of it. I hope, if I had a crystal ball, I would love to see how it looks like in 5 to 10 years, because I would love to see more of that. But
yeah, I mean, I would just add to that. So yeah, I'm really glad you're here, because yeah, you're like the great person for that question. I think off the back of that, something I've definitely noticed is when it comes to those higher levels of government, being able to categorize games has always been a real challenge, because it's like, do they put us in media? Do they put us in entertainment? Do they kind of sort of branch us off from film? And you see that happen a lot. And that often will slow down these kinds of mechanisms, like putting apprenticeships in place, because as you say, like trying to map it across is a challenge, because by games' very nature, it is not film, it is not TV, it is not software, it's something else. And because that structure isn't there, you're having to build it from scratch. I don't know if you want to jump in.
No, I mean, the point I was going to raise was raised first off. I mean, this is exactly why we are supporting things like skills boot camps in multiple different areas, but obviously the work that tech educators are doing on the kind of gaming side is brilliant, and we need kind of more of that sort of stuff as well in the region to kind of really support people.
Thank you very much for your question. Very good. Do we have any more questions? Yep. Oh, James.
Making me work, aren't you?
Question from me is, if the challenges and the barriers that you talked about for Norfolk, completely agree, and if you had £250,000 right now, where would you put that to support the growth of the gaming industry?
Well, I'd start my own studio and make it, expand it and make it bigger. But I'll put it to a panel. £250,000. Where would that be allocated?
Oh, yeah. James says, don't take it, Rich. God. For me, it'd be prototype funding, so I'd carve that 250 into a bunch of pots. I don't know if it would be different sizes or they'd all be the same size, because this is quite an exciting kind of mind exploration. But yeah, it would be for that. And maybe a chunk for a centralised space where people that access the funding could then connect with one another and have support like the Tentacle Zone. Because I feel like there's a lot of goodwill already there in Norfolk for these teams that want to make games. But yeah, as of now, we don't really have like a physical space, though we are very grateful to Artlist for giving us their offices every other month for our meetups. But yeah, it's like, yeah, some funding behind a centralised space, and then, yes, make games. That's what I do.
I think I'd say an incubator that had a kind of funding mechanism at the end, but also had systems that taught that assisted those startups with business running, because that's one thing we talk a lot about, is that you need a games studio, not just a games idea. So something like that that would kind of create that space that would fund those early prototypes, but also support businesses. I think Falmouth have a fantastic model for their incubator, which was based on the problem of how do we improve the economy in their area, and through the kind of tech games discipline. And I would kind of echo something like that and kind of make it Norfolk specific. So yeah, something like an incubator.
James, you've got something to add to that?
I want more. No, I mean,
take that 250, invest it, and get
yeah, exactly. It is a really good question. I mean, it's where it's sort of required most. I mean, I think the kind of the prototype, kind of incubator, accelerator, sort of games hub bit with that wraparound support, I think is the obvious answer. It's absolutely central to kind of what's required with those close links to academia.
And I'd put some of it behind getting those games to international events as well. And then slapping a massive Made in Norfolk on the stand.
Yeah. I think what would be important to the incubator is maybe a publishing arm to help to create that industry here. So investing that money into a publishing arm that was connected to the incubator to really take the products from beginning all the way to the end.
Yeah, commercialisation is a big thing, because that's the missing piece in a lot of news companies. Thank you for that, James. Neil, got Chris at the back there.
With the size of local studios, do you guys think there's room for product-focused roles, or would I have to go down the scary route of starting something myself if I wanted in?
That sounds like a Susie or Robin.
I'll just quickly say that product and production roles seem, certainly in smaller companies, overlap heavily. So I would kind of say there's definitely room for production roles, and that skill set would map across. I did a product management course online to prepare for my own company, so yeah.
Yeah, games producer, that kind of role.
Yeah, a lot of the systems approach to it, skill sets, tools, software, map right across. So.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
It's getting a workout.
Yeah.
It's pretty simple, but what can I do as like somebody who's been to university and got most of a portfolio and that kind of thing? What can I do like right now to get myself a job in games? Like in Norfolk?
The obvious one is to make things in your own time. I know it's a crappy answer, but by far the best thing you can bring to any prospective employer is just, here's some stuff I'm working on for fun. Because if the other person doesn't have that, you are going to shine. Like, it just shows that you just really want to be doing this and that you're practicing skills in your own time. And you might even have a great game that comes out of it that lets you take it to festivals maybe, which is a great way to get noticed. It's how I landed my first job, as I managed to get a game I was working on at university in a free festival, or a festival that had a slot for little indies who didn't have any actual money. And it impresses employers so much if you have a project. So that's the number one thing for me.
Yeah, go for
I
it.
would maybe also add, depending on what stage you're at with your portfolio and who you had eyes on, look, if the studios you really want to work at, look the people that are in your job, see if you can find their portfolios, compare them to yours, see, compared to that, do I show like similar types of styles or programming things, depending what your portfolio is in really. So that's always a good tip. If you can get feedback from someone within the industry, always good. It's a bit scary, and it's usually easiest to find people who are amenable to that in like Discord communities that have gaming experts and career seekers in it. So that's always something to get some direct feedback from someone who works in games. Also take it always with a pinch of salt, because people will still always bring in their personal opinions, and if they're not a hiring manager, there's a degree of relevance to it. But it can't hurt to get more eyes on it, and also start applying, do many interviews, even if it's for roles that are just like in the same realm, because then you are going to be ready to nail that interview for the job you really want. Scary as it is.
Quite a lot of games companies will accept kind of a CV in the pipeline. So if there may not be a role ready for you, just to kind of add to what Susie was saying, absolutely, like think about where you want to be, what you want to do, who's doing that at the moment, match your portfolio for that. Talk to people, be part of the community, but then there are options and opportunities to just forward a kind of a CV and an application if a role isn't available, particularly if you've networked and you've spoken to people, and people are recommending you based on your work and the conversations you've had with them. So, yeah.
So I would say, depending on the size of company that you're looking to work for, if you're going down a AAA route, so a larger games company, something I've seen that's worked quite well is because I know a little bit about your portfolio. There's 3D. I've seen 3D artists that have done tutorials, step-by-steps of how they've made pieces in their portfolio and put it on the blog side of their ArtStation, and also included it on YouTube. And because that shows that you're able to break down and explain clearly your process. You're not just a great artist who, on their own, without any other input, makes something cool. You can actually do it in a way that benefits others, and that's really valuable to those teams, because they want to find artists that can work in teams, provide feedback, etc. I think networking's a big part of it, so any events you can attend, obviously you're here today, that's great. Develop's really good for that. The Women in Games Jobs Fair, which is online and is free, is a bit more accessible than going to Brighton, which can be really expensive, though I have done it in a day from Norwich. It was a long day, but I've done it because I didn't want to pay for a hotel. The Games Jobs Fair, it's not just for women, even though it's run by Women in Games. Those events are really good for portfolio feedback, because there tends to be a lot of larger games studios which are Women in Games members, so they have signed up to support these events. So you'll have people doing talks at those events that you might not be able to get access to at other ones. So that one's a good one. If you're looking to work in smaller companies, or if you don't have a kind of predefined skill set like 3D, some advice I was literally giving yesterday is offering your kind of skills and your support to people that are doing game jams. Game jams are something, if you haven't done one before or don't know about it, it's where you have to make a game in a set period, often against a theme. itch.io has at least 50 happening every day of the year. And if you go on there and have a look, you can find them. A lot of them have Discord servers. You can get into that Discord server. And whenever I've done game jams, if someone came along and was like, I'm going to run all your documentation, I'm going to keep everyone up to date on everything, I will do any random bit of artwork, UI, spreadsheet filling out that you need, I would snap that person up immediately. And that's a really great way for you to start getting the experience of the life cycle of a game without it costing you money to go to events or any of that stuff. So I think finding game jams, connecting with people online, and offering whatever skills you have just to get that experience also helps you build up your portfolio and your CV, and making stuff is great, but if you're really at the early stages, you might not have an idea for a game. So you can just sort of, it's almost like a runner in TV, but for games, and jams are a really accessible way to do that. Sorry, that was a massive answer, but I get asked this stuff a lot.
That was great. No, that was a really good answer.
Hopefully that helped.
We've got time for one more question probably at the moment.
This one down here.
Neil, run, Neil.
Thank you, Neil. We do appreciate it.
Thank you, Neil.
Most I've run in a week.
Hello. I was wondering, are there any tools or software that you would recommend that people learn that could help them getting a job in the games industry? Tools that are more specialized, like game engines, version control, or more general for like project management, team management, things like that. Like possibly even industry standards or tools that are just generally really sought after by game companies.
That's a very good question. It's something we really should have covered. So yeah, you put me to shame a bit not asking that question myself. What do we think? What tools?
I think it's very specific depending on what you want to do. What I would do is kind of tack on to at the end of what Robin was saying. Use game jams as a format to use those tools in a real way, like in a way that's going to help produce something, because game jams are accessible and super fun. And they happen like all the time. And then it really does depend on what you want to do. Like, so if you want to do production, then you needing to know things like Jira and QA. So things like Jira is super important. If you want to do 3D, then you've got Blender, ZBrush, Maya, games engines. Unreal Engine is huge. Unity, Godot is getting a lot of love at the moment. We could just sit here and reel off all the things that would be good, but my advice would be to do game jams and then figure out where you want to go and what you want to do. And then, as Susie was saying before, find somebody that's doing that and see if you can identify what skills they have on their LinkedIn portfolio. They might be a master in Unreal. From an education point of view, and particularly from an arts university point of view, your process and how you've kind of made work, I would argue, comes above technical proficiency. Technical proficiency is still very important, but if you're kind of neck and neck in an interview and you're able to demonstrate your process, your design thinking, how you've got from A to B, ideation, you have communication skills, all of that is going to trump technical proficiency, if I'm perfectly honest. So it's not necessarily an easy answer, but depending on where you want to go, you'll be able to find the right software for you.
Tom, do you have any thoughts on tooling? Because you're obviously an ink person.
Yeah, this is something that interests me a lot. So if you were to work at a big company, they would teach you whatever it is that you need. I've never used Jira in my life, or at least before I joined the new company. It's just a part of the job. So familiarity with the fact that there are pieces of software that let you model things or manage projects, it's probably all you need for joining a big company. If they decide to switch to Unreal, you will learn Unreal on the job. If you were to want to join a smaller company, less than 50 people, they are probably looking for somebody with a very specific skill set. They're looking for somebody who is good at, humanoid avatars in Unity, in which case it'll probably be a case of, oh, that's a thing that I already do. I am the great fit for this. So I would say try to get a bit of coverage of just understanding what the tools that people use are, and just sort of know they exist. Even if you don't personally want to use them. I've never touched Unreal. I probably should one day. But it's never been a problem. Yeah, absolutely. And it would lock me out of some things, for sure. But it's never been a problem. So I would say just know what's out there and don't worry about it too much.
I was going to say, Into Games have got a list of free software tools that you can use. If you look up Into Games tools in your search engine of choice, that'll come up, and that's a really good catch-all that I can kind of throw at people. Unfortunately, there is no magical formula of software that you can learn to get a job. And I don't mean that in a kind of condescending way. I just mean, even in my own personal experience recently, I've had to learn new software since starting my game because The industry has changed, the landscape has changed, so some tools will become obsolete, some companies will close down, and so I think it's more about showing that you can learn lots of different software. That's almost the skill that people are looking for, is that you can just pick something new up and you can do that independently, and you can kind of manage your learning of that in a way that will support any business you're working for, rather than I have X number of years in this tool, just because things are moving really fast. Open source software now is really good. It wasn't when I was at uni. It was sort of the clunky cousin of the flashy ones, whereas now it's like really, really competitive, which is great for accessibility, but it does kind of mean that because everything's changing real quick, it's almost like your skills will never be safe. It's like you've always got to be finding something new, which isn't what you want to hear, because it's like, tell me the Konami code.
Yep, I built my company on open source software. It's all open source because I like to have access to the code. But yeah, you can do it with anything. Just make some prototypes, follow YouTube tutorials, just choose something and do it. Execution is key.
Yeah, because what you don't want is someone on your team being like, well, if you don't pay for a Maya license, I can't do any 3D. You want someone that joins your team and is like, yeah, I'll pick it up, right? And that almost goes for any scale of business, because they might change engine or tools. So.
Okay, that's about all we have time for today, unfortunately. So thank my panel, Jake, Susie,
thanks very much.
Robin, Tom, and James. You've been great. I just want to give a quick plug to Norfolk game developers. We do monthly meetups, alternating between show and tells, which are hosted by Artlist at their central Norwich offices. And we also do, the other month, we will do social meetups, which are now kindly hosted by Jake at Norwich University of the Arts at their city centre campus. So we've got one coming up on 27th of February. So anybody's welcome to come along. You don't have to be a game developer. You just have interesting games is enough. There'll be musicians, well, not playing musicians, but artists, people who are interested in music, people who like board game development. All kinds of people come to them, and they're really good fun. So hopefully see some of you guys there at our next meetup. Okay, and that's us.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.